That's a car.
Oh, it's a vehicle.
No
That's
way.
a car. That is a car.
Why isn't there a car on the boat?
3 miles under the Pacific, a high-tech drone just found something that makes absolutely no sense. Hidden inside the steel skeleton of the USS Yorktown is something that no one expected to have found under such depth.
USS Yorktown was commissioned in 1943 at Newport News, Virginia.
Experts are truly shaken because this civilian secret contradicts everything we knew about the battle. We thought we found a grave, but we actually stumbled into a frozen crime scene. The return to the abyss. Deep under the Pacific Ocean, something had been lurking, waiting patiently to be discovered. During the end of 2023, a team of scientists on a research vessel called the Nautilus decided it was time to finally visit an old friend. They used a high-tech underwater drone named Atalanta to dive into a part of the ocean called the Hadal Zone. Now, this part of the ocean is way more than 3 miles deep, and no human can survive such depth for long. Even the sunken, famous Titanic ship is only 2 miles down. Far below that depth lies the Yorktown, which was a legendary U.S. Navy carrier. And that's what these teams of researchers were on the lookout for. With such depth, the Yorktown was lost in a place where the sun never reaches, and temperatures stay near freezing. When the drone cameras finally cut through the clouds of silt, the researchers saw something that made their jaws drop. The USS Yorktown was not a broken pile of junk. It was standing tall and upright on the seafloor, most likely because of the lack of oxygen that kept the metal from escaping rusting. Even the paint on it was still visible. It was such a huge discovery that it was live-streamed for more than 100 experts from across the globe to watch from their home offices and labs. They expected to see guns and fighter planes. But what they came across added more to their excitement. Right in Yorktown was a 1940 Ford Super Deluxe Woody car that had been sitting on the hangar deck among the military equipment. Seeing a civilian car on a sinking warship is the kind of detail that stops a historian in their tracks.
It's a car.
Look at all the magic I got.
That's a car.
Oh, it's a vehicle.
This ship was a home for over 2,000 sailors who lived, worked, and kept some very surprising cargo on board. The team spent hours documenting every inch of the hull to figure out exactly what happened during those final moments in 1942. They were careful to treat the area with respect because the Yorktown is a protected war grave. Every dent in the metal and every piece of debris told a story of survival. The new mission of these researchers was to find the missing pieces of the ship's final hours, and the high-definition footage gave them answers they had been seeking for decades. The state of the ship is a living record of a crew that fought until the very end. Now, you might not understand the history behind this, but to understand why these finds are so shocking, we first have to travel back to the time when the Yorktown became the ship that refused to die. The Fighting Lady and the Miracle of Midway. In early 1942, the United States Navy was in a lot of trouble. During World War II, they joined forces to attack Japan, Germany, and Italy. However, the attack on Pearl Harbor had destroyed their battleship fleet, and the Japanese military seemed impossible to stop. Everything depended on a few aircraft carriers to hold the line. The Yorktown was one of them, and she was already exhausted. In May 1942, she was hit by a massive armor-piercing bomb during the Battle of the Coral Sea. The explosion killed 66 men and wrecked her heavy boilers. Experts looked at the damage and said it would take 90 days in a secure shipyard to get her ready to fight again. The commander of the fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz, didn't have 90 days. He knew a bigger battle was coming at Midway, and he needed every ship he could get. He looked at the shipyard workers in Hawaii and told them they had 72 hours to fix the ship, even though it sounded impossible. Over 1,000 workers swarmed the Yorktown, working through the night, welding steel and patching pipes while the ship was still in the water. By some kind of miracle, the Yorktown sailed out of the harbor 3 days later. She was still being repaired by workers on board as she headed toward the fight. This fast turnaround was a total game-changer that no one would have expected. Even the Japanese commander, Admiral Yamamoto, was convinced the Yorktown was at the bottom of the ocean, or at least out of the war. He planned his attack, thinking he only had to worry about 2 American carriers, the Enterprise and the Hornet. But he was wrong. When the Yorktown showed up at a secret meeting point called Point Luck, the Japanese walked into a trap they never saw coming. On the morning of June 4th, the planes on the Yorktown's deck took off to make history. The battle was brutal. American torpedo bombers flew low and drew away the enemy fighters, which cleared the way for the dive bombers high above. In 10 minutes, that changed the world. The Americans hit 3 Japanese carriers. The pride of the Japanese Navy was suddenly on fire and sinking. However, the victory came with a heavy price. A lone Japanese carrier called the Hiryu launched a revenge strike that went straight for the Yorktown. The sailors on the Yorktown put up a massive wall of fire. Gunners and fighter pilots knocked down dozens of planes, yet 3 bombs still managed to hit the deck. The ship was a mess, yet the damage control teams were so fast that they put out the fires and patched the flight deck in record time.
The attack on the carrier Yorktown. Filmed under fire, the battle that cost the Japs 10 warships.
When a second wave of Japanese planes arrived, they saw the Yorktown looking so clean they thought it was a completely different, undamaged carrier. They wasted their best shots on a ship they had already crippled. The Yorktown had survived the unsurvivable twice before. Yet, on June 4th, her luck was about to collide with a Japanese torpedo. The smoke inside the ship was thick enough to choke anyone who was not wearing a mask. Those 3 bomb hits had ripped through the metal and killed the power to the boilers. For a few minutes, the Yorktown sat dead in the water. Down in the belly of the ship, engineers worked in pitch blackness and rising heat, but they weren't about to give up easily. These men somehow managed to get the steam pressure back up, and the ship started moving again. The crew actually thought they had a chance to survive the day. Soon enough, that hope vanished when a group of Japanese Kate torpedo bombers appeared on the horizon. They flew low over the waves and dropped their heavy cargo. 2 torpedoes slammed into the port side of the ship with a deafening roar. The force was so great that the Yorktown began to tip over immediately. Within minutes, the ship was leaning at a steep 26-degree angle. They couldn't even walk on the flight deck without sliding toward the edge. Captain Elliot Buckmaster looked at his broken ship and made the hardest call of his life. He ordered everyone to abandon ship. He did not want any more of his men to die on a sinking wreck. As the sun went down on June 4th, the Yorktown was left alone in the Pacific. Everyone expected her to be gone by morning. However, when the sun rose the next day, the Fighting Lady was still there. She was tilted and battered, yet she refused to go under. This gave the Navy a glimmer of hope. On June 6th, a small group of volunteers went back on board to try and save her. They began cutting away heavy equipment and throwing it overboard to level the ship. They were even making progress. A destroyer called the USS Hammond pulled up alongside to provide power and water to the salvage crew. While the crew worked, a Japanese submarine named the I-1168 was watching through a periscope. It managed to sneak past the American destroyers and fired 4 torpedoes. 1 hit the Hammond and 2 hit the Yorktown. The Hammond was literally snapped in half and sank in less than 4 minutes. It was a horrific sight for the men on the Yorktown. The carrier groaned as more water rushed into the hull, and the salvage crew had to flee for their lives. The Yorktown held on for several more hours, wallowing in the waves like a wounded animal. Finally, at 5 o'clock in the morning on June 7th, the ship gave up the fight. She rolled over on her side and slipped quietly beneath the surface. Her battle flags were still flying as the blue water swallowed the island structure and the flight deck. She had stayed afloat long enough to ensure the American victory at Midway was complete. The ocean is very deep in that part of the world, and once she disappeared, no one knew exactly where she landed. For 56 years, she was lost to the darkness until the man who found the Titanic decided to go looking for the Fighting Lady, the Discovery. Some people might see Robert Ballard as a detective, but the oceanographer was very intrigued about Yorktown. As someone who grew up in San Diego, which is a city that has ties to the Navy culture and World War II's history, it felt a bit personal. One would have thought his side quests would be over after discovering the Titanic, but that was only the beginning. Now focused on finding the whereabouts of the Yorktown, he used side-scan sonar to narrow down the search area until he found the massive hull sitting upright. Even though his mission was a success, the technology of the late 90s had some major limitations. The cameras back then produced grainy, blue-tinted footage that was blurry. You could see the ship, but the small human details that make a wreck feel alive weren't clear enough. But with more recent technological advancements and the recent NOAA expedition that was held in 2025, there was hope to finally find the long-lost ship. Equipment like the research vessel Nautilus, which carries an underwater drone named Atalanta that is equipped with 4K ultra-high-definition cameras, is one crucial component of the search. These cameras do more than record video. They capture every tiny scratch in the paint and every bolt in the steel. The lighting systems are powerful enough to reveal the true colors of the ship for the first time in 80 years. Scientists were finally able to see the Measure 12 camouflage, which was a special blue and gray paint scheme designed to hide the carrier from enemy scouts. Navigation has also changed the game for historians. In the past, pilots had to be extremely careful not to snag the tether of the drone on the jagged metal of the wreck. Today, they use sub-centimeter GPS and advanced sonar mapping to fly the drone with incredible precision. This allows the team to guide the robot into dangerous, tight openings such as elevator shafts and hangar bays. While the drone moves, computers on the surface are busy creating a 3D digital twin of the entire wreck. The whole goal of the mission changed significantly. In 1998, the big question was simply whether the ship was actually there. Now, the mission is about what the ship can tell us about its final moments. This work is no longer done in secret thanks to high-speed satellite links. More than 100 experts from the United States and Japan can watch the live feed together from anywhere on Earth. They can discuss their findings in real time, which helps identify objects that might have been overlooked in the past. This global collaboration turned a dark spot on the ocean floor into a shared historical treasure. With these new eyes, the team descended toward the hangar deck, and that's when they saw something that shouldn't have been there. As the drone cameras tilted toward the hangar deck, the team expected to see the usual remnants of a warship, such as twisted metal or fuel lines. Instead, it was a car sitting perfectly upright on the deck. Seeing a civilian car inside a combat aircraft carrier was a discovery no one expected to find. Historians immediately began debating exactly what kind of car it was. Some experts believe it is a 1940 or 1941 Ford Super Deluxe, often called a Woody because of its classic style. Others argue that the shape of the body looks more like a Packard staff vehicle. Regardless of the brand, the condition of the car is stunning. Despite being underwater for over 80 years, The chrome trim still reflects the lights of the ROV. One could still see the split windshield and the spare tire still mounted in its place, and it was all because of the freezing water temperatures. The big question is, why a heavy civilian vehicle was on a frontline aircraft carrier during the most important naval battle in history. Ships like the Yorktown were usually packed with planes, bombs, and fuel. Every inch of space was valuable. One theory is that the car belonged to a high-ranking officer who was moving his personal belongings between bases. Another possibility is that the car was a staff vehicle meant to be delivered to the military base at Midway Island. In the rush of the war, the Yorktown might have been the only way to get the car to its destination. This discovery is even more confusing when you consider the orders given during the battle. When the Yorktown was badly damaged and leaning to one side, Captain Buckmaster ordered the crew to throw all heavy cargo overboard. They were trying to lighten the ship so it would stop tipping. Sailors tossed expensive plans and heavy equipment into the ocean to save the carrier. For some reason, this car stayed on board. It was found sitting near the number 2 elevator, which suggests the crew might have been trying to move it when the final torpedoes hit. Finding a piece of normal, everyday life in a zone of total war is incredibly rare. At a depth of 3 miles, this is one of the only civilian vehicles ever found on a sunken World War II ship. It reminds us that the Yorktown was not just a weapon. It was a place where people lived and moved their lives across the ocean. The car is just a tiny human detail in a massive historical tragedy. The wood was not the only thing left behind in the hangar. A few yards away sat a weapon of war still ready to fire. The armed Dauntless. As the drone glided past that old sedan, the lights began to pick up the jagged edges of aluminum wings and tails. This was the aft hangar area, the place where the ship's muscle was kept between missions. The team found several Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers scattered across the floor. But one discovery made the researchers stop talking entirely. They found an SBD-3 aircraft resting completely upside down. When the cameras zoomed in, they saw a 500-pound bomb still locked in its release cradle. It was a chilling sight. This weapon was armed and ready to be dropped on the enemy over 80 years ago. And it is still there today, waiting in the silence. Historians were able to do some detective work by looking at the markings on the wreckage. They identified one of the planes as B-5, with the bureau number 4581. This plane actually did not belong to the Yorktown. It was from the USS Enterprise. During the chaos of the battle, Lieutenant William Roberts and his partner William Steinman had to land their battle-damaged plane on the nearest deck they could find. That deck happened to be the Yorktown. These 2 men survived the landing, but their plane became a permanent part of the Yorktown's story when the ship went down. The presence of these armed planes says a lot about what was happening in those final minutes before the ship was hit. It provides clear evidence that the crew was working as fast as possible to fuel and arm a reserve force for a counterstrike. They were trying to get these bombers back into the air to finish the fight. The hangar was a hive of activity until the Japanese bombs and torpedoes changed everything. You can see the scars of that struggle on the planes themselves. The high-definition cameras captured close-up views of shrapnel holes and fire damage that ripped through the thin metal skins of the aircraft. Navigating the drone through this area was a massive technical challenge. The hangar is filled with a jumbled mess of wires, pipes, and plane parts. The pilots had to be incredibly careful not to snag the ROV on any of the debris. Most importantly, they had to move around the live bomb without disturbing it. One wrong move could have ended the mission. Seeing these planes exactly where they fell gives us a frozen snapshot of the bravery and the frantic energy of the sailors who were trying to save their ship. The Yorktown was a place of work and a place of war. But it was also a place where the sailors left their own marks on the walls. Beyond the planes and the car, the ROV moved into the darkness of an elevator shaft, stumbling upon the Yorktown's most personal secret. The secret mural of the elevator shaft. Stretched across 42 feet of steel was a massive, hand-painted mural titled "A Chart of the Cruises of the USS Yorktown." It didn't look anything like a military requirement or a standard piece of equipment. It was a giant piece of art that must have been created by a sailor with a paintbrush and a lot of pride. The mural is a detailed map of everywhere the Yorktown had been as it tracks her journeys through the Atlantic Ocean and across the Pacific. Seeing this in person through a drone camera was a huge moment for the team on the Nautilus. They were looking at the handwriting of a man who lived on this ship more than 8 decades ago.
Now this is the way your deck should look when you're ready for action.
And the most interesting thing about this painting was the incredible details. Even after all this time in the salt water, the names of the ports and the dates of the crossings are still clear enough to read. The paint is so vibrant that it looks like it was painted recently. This specific spot in the elevator shaft was chosen for a reason. Thousands of sailors would pass through this area every day while they were moving planes or supplies between the hangar and the flight deck. It was a high-traffic zone where the crew could look at the wall and see exactly how far they had traveled from home. It was meant to boost morale and remind everyone of the history they were making. Historians believe it was a group effort, or perhaps the work of one very talented crew member who wanted to document the ship's legacy in a way that official records never could. The most emotional part of the discovery is how the mural ends. It had no final date or final port listed for the Battle of Midway because the ship never finished that journey. It is a literal timeline of a life cut short. Most shipwrecks are piles of metal. However, the Yorktown has these personal touches that make you stop and think about the individuals who walked these decks. It survived the explosions and the long fall to the bottom of the sea, only to be intact enough to not lose its tails. This mural tracked where she had been, but the state of her guns told the story of how she ended. The defiant guns of Midway. When the ROV moved outside to the gallery decks, the mood changed from artistic to aggressive. The drone lights hit the anti-aircraft guns, and researchers saw a sight that felt like a punch to the gut. Many of these weapons are still pointed toward the sky. They are locked in the exact positions they were in when the sailors last fired them. Right next to them are the smaller 20mm Oerlikon cannons. These guns were the last line of defense against Japanese planes, and seeing them still aimed at the clouds makes it surreal. The area around the guns is littered with clues about how intense the fighting was. The ready service lockers, which are the metal boxes where ammunition is kept, are still standing open. In the rush of the attack, gunners did not have time to be neat. They were ripping those lockers open to grab every shell they could find. There are empty shell casings scattered on the deck, resting exactly where they fell after being ejected from the guns. The scene alone was haunting. As the drone climbed higher, it reached the bridge and the island structure. This was the command center where Captain Buckmaster and his officers made life-or-death decisions. The cameras revealed significant damage here, showing where shrapnel and explosions had torn into the steel. Despite the wreckage, the massive 5-inch guns on the lower decks are surprisingly intact. These were dual-purpose weapons that could fire at ships or planes. The barrels are still straight, and the heavy metal shields around them are still in place. The most incredible part was when the ROV pilots moved the camera to retrace the sightlines of the gunners. When you look through the camera, you are seeing exactly what a young sailor saw in June 1942. You see the railing, the gun sights, and the open sky above. It's almost easy to imagine the Japanese Valdive bombers screaming down from 14,000 feet toward the deck. The drone also captured the mechanical state of the guns. The gears and training mechanisms that allow the guns to turn and tilt look like they are in perfect shape. If you could somehow get down there with a bit of oil and a wrench, it feels like those guns might actually still work.
But now Jocko, our captain, confers with the air group commander and reveals the plan.
This part of the ship is a monument to the defense of Midway. While the mural showed the history of where the Yorktown had been, these guns show how she went down swinging. Every weapon on the deck was pushed to its limit to protect the carrier. The metal is scarred, and the decks are bent. Yet the weapons remain defiant. The Yorktown was a fortress, but no amount of firepower could stop the damage that ultimately sent her to the bottom. The ROV moved down the side of the ship to inspect the actual wounds that sent this giant to the bottom. Up close, the hull looks less like a ship and more like a crime scene. High-resolution scans revealed massive gaps on the port side where the torpedoes struck. Some of these holes were made by planes, while the final ones came from that Japanese submarine that slipped through the defense. The steel is bent and torn inward, showing the incredible force of the underwater explosions that finally broke the ship's back. Looking higher up the hull, the drone captured the entry point of the 250-kilogram bomb. This was a particularly nasty hit because the bomb did not explode when it first touched the ship. Instead, it punched through 4 separate decks before finally detonating deep inside the boiler rooms. This was the moment the Yorktown lost its ability to move or fight back.
Was already dead or his release gear jammed. Smokey, the pride of Arkansas, hears about that one. He almost takes.
Forensic experts studying the footage can see the way the internal pressure pushed the bulkheads outward. It confirms exactly what the sailors said about the ship feeling like it was being ripped apart from the inside. The trip down to the seafloor was also hard on the structure. As the Yorktown sank through 3 miles of water, the pressure became nearly impossible to imagine. This immense weight caused the flight deck at the very front of the ship to buckle and fold. It looks as if the steel gave up under the strain of the descent. Surprisingly, the ship is still wearing its original colors. The drone's lights picked up the measure 12 pattern. These blue and gray stripes were painted on the hull to help the ship blend in with the waves and the horizon. It was a clever way to hide from enemy submarines, although it was not enough on that final day. The way the ship sits today tells us about the moment it finally hit the bottom. The Yorktown landed perfectly upright, yet it hit with such a thud that the keel is now buried deep in the Pacific silt. This mud covers the bottom portion of the hull, acting like a heavy blanket that has kept the lowest parts of the ship hidden for decades. Toward the back, the ROV found the massive propellers and the rudder. The rudder is still locked in a hard overturn. The screws are still there, frozen in time and covered in a fine layer of silt, never to turn again. While the steel tells a story of war, the life now growing on that steel tells a different story. Rewriting the history books. 3 miles down, the Pacific sea floor is basically a desert of flat mud, but the Yorktown has transformed it into a site for exploration. This mission did more than take high-definition photos. It helped rewrite the history books. By looking at the scars on the hull, historians realized the ship was even tougher than the old records claimed. The crowded hangar deck remains a huge puzzle. If the crew was trying to lighten the ship to save it, why did they leave so many planes and that mysterious car behind? It suggests the final moments were much more chaotic than anyone realized. We also finally understand why the Yorktown stayed upright while the Japanese carriers flipped and broke apart. Her tough design saved lives, and the lessons learned from her sinking led to much better fire suppression systems on all future U.S. ships. Before the Nautilus moved on, The crew held special ceremonies to honor the 141 men who died on the ship. They performed native Hawaiian prayers and military honors to show respect for this sacred site. There are no plans to ever send robots inside the ship. Out of respect for the fallen sailors, the interior will remain a secret. The Yorktown is more than a ship. It is a monument to a generation that changed the world. Now, we finally have the full picture of her sacrifice and her final resting place. What do you think the mystery car was doing on the Yorktown? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.